welcome to today's CPG Masterclass series, which is part 3 of Communication Science and Coaching with Marie, Jeffery and Shirin Hornecker. First of all, I'm Tom Bentley. I'm the Communications and Event Manager for the CPG, so I'd like to welcome you all to today's webinar. I hope you enjoy it. Just before we do get started, just make sure your microphones are muted, but you can keep your screens on so we can see who's there, who's listening and who's watching. I'm also recording this and we'll upload it straight onto the hub page afterwards. So if you miss anything or you want to go back to the Q&A session, you can. And we will allocate, as I just mentioned, 10 or so minutes to the Q&A session afterwards. So any questions for Marie or Shirin, please post them into the chat option in the bottom of your screens as we go along. And then I'll spend a bit of time to go through those as many as we can afterwards as well. So without sort of further ado, I'll hand you straight over to Marie and Shirin just to sort of give a brief introduction to both of them. You may have already seen or be aware of Marie because this is her 3rd session with Communication Science and Coaching. She's a Austrian PGA professional and she's done a lot of work with the CPG, including with the development team. And then Marie, Jeffery, and then Shirin Hornecker, who's mental coach for the German National Ladies team, and she's also a communicologist. She completed her degree in communicology a couple of years ago. And both of them together are going to be exploring the topic of coaching communication, the feedback loop, and its significance for golf coaches. So I'll hand you straight over to you two ladies if you want to get the floor running.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Yeah, feedback. Marie and I decided to talk about feedback today since we think it's a really powerful and a simple way to make your student grow and learn, if done in a proper way and with respecting certain key points. So today we will focus on clarifying what really feedback is and what feedback is not. Then give you some basic fundamentals about feedback, and then also show you some practical applications in golf when you use feedback. So take a moment for a while and reflect. You can do the next slide. On when you think about feedback. And I'm sure all of you had a moment in your lifetime and work where your boss or coworker walked up to you and said, are you ready? You want to have some feedback from me? So when you think about the feedback part in your life and experiences, if you only have internally, if you recognize only positive responses, or if you have maybe also some experience where I think feedback was not always a good thing in my life. And this is important when you reflect for a moment, because this is what often happens with feedback. Maybe you know some of these sentences when we think of the next slide. Is this really feedback? When we say and tell someone on the golf course, a student, I saw you being so unmotivated today, or is this rather an interpretation? Or when we talk about we putted great on the golf course today, what's the we inside of that sentence? You might have heard that from parents also. Or what about your swing just looks great? Is that rather an opinion or a judgment and not a feedback? Or you're just useless, or you don't try hard enough as a criticism. There's similar sentences also in office spaces and co-working spaces where we hear a lot of these, and it's always often framed as feedback. When we think really about it, it's not feedback. Next. So do we feedback or do we not feedback? What is it that we often give, as I mentioned? So it's often criticism, interpretation, or an opinion, judgment, or praise. And some of these are not bad. It's just a question of the framing. I can give someone praise or give someone my opinion, or if I really think it's a good way that that person or that student should hear some real tough criticism so he maybe gets motivated and gets going and practices more, then it's okay. But again, we want to get you aware of when you use ever the word feedback, that it really is just that and nothing else. So this is probably the 2 important sentences for you. So when you frame something as feedback, it really needs to be that. And the intention intentions in the frame always has to be clear. And this is something where you can freely then work around. As I mentioned, we give you key elements, and this is one of the keys to remind you often about. And when you know, as Marie also talked probably in some of the other seminars, working with key elements makes you flexible and make you work freely with those. So what is it then that we can feed back? We talked a lot about feeding back, like you saw the little guy in the fishbowl. And why can it be so valuable for our players? And it's just simply put that when I feed something back as a coach, I want to feed back valuable information for a player or student so they can understand what they do when they play well. And even more importantly, what they do when they do not play well. So they learn to differentiate between those two. It's kind of like an outside monitor we can be to a student or player when they're out on the golf course, for example, and we can tell them information that we filmed or recorded and replay that information to the student. And we all know as golfers, we're so busy playing and sometimes we don't recognize things. So we as coaches can provide this valuable information and feed that back. Feedback also should always reflect my intentions, as I mentioned before, and we have these two colors. So just check always with you, is my intention really to make my student be cultivated, grow, be confident, self-reliant, independent? So that is the reason really why I want to feed something back. Or do I want to tell him something rather to fuel maybe my ego or come across as a competent former player or great coach? Then it's something to really think about why I want to tell him something and frame it as feedback. So always ask yourself the question, does the way I talk, the way I ask questions reflect my intentions? Just a few elements simply before you give feedback. We recommend that you have an agreement with the player. Some of you might be following players on the courses to tournaments, and it's good to sit down with a player before a season or before a tournament and talk with him about the feedback. It's something to tell the player also, this is something really valuable. How should we handle this part? Should we wait? Do you want to come and ask me after a while? Because we all know after a round, after a tournament, we all need a little while to have our own moment, and we don't want to have someone jumping on us and be jumping into the feedback frame. So have an agreement with a player how you want to set the frame and when. And then hand in hand with that, never give unasked feedback. So never ask or tell someone about giving feedback without the permission, basically. That goes together with the agreement. And before you talk and give someone feedback, it's very, very important to ask first questions. You all know maybe the first good, better, how feedback way of asking questions. That is a good way. Or you can also ask questions like these. So they learn what did go well, what did not go well, and do you know the difference of what happened? And I always teach my student really that strategy, that they know what strategy did I do today that helped me to play well, and what helped today, or what did not help today, how did I help my bad strategy to perform purely? And the more we learn these differences and more that we learn these puzzle pieces, basically, a player really grows. And more importantly, they ask themselves first the question internally, they really grow. Because this is also how learning really works, when I connect internally to my resources and my knowledge. It is also really important in that respect that feedback always needs to be, as I said, sorted feedback always needs to be you sorted. So what does it mean, IU sorting? Maybe you know or heard these sentences before. We played under par, we did a great job on the course today. Versus, you're an idiot, basically, how come you three-putted? This is really harsh sometimes as coaches, as you, just wait, no, go back. As coaches, I'm sure you heard also some parents talk that way. I had experienced that many times. And it's really dangerous if you also monitor that on other people, how they talk to a player, if they use that "we" word a lot, that you become aware. And also for yourself, never to become too involved in a player's experience. Also in the experience of relating to his experience, for example, saying, I know what you're going through, I was also a player once. There needs to be a boundary, and the word of I, you is really powerful in that way. And using the word we in the way really creates a big mess also for especially young adults in growing up and later on in their lives. If a person doesn't have the IU sorted way implemented inside, that they know who am I, what did I just do, and who are you helping me to find answers, then it becomes not easy in a lifetime. So the next slide really goes to stress how important it is, how I can detect violations verbally and of course physically. We had parents also sometimes crossing over physically. I'm sure there's, I have big confidence in PTA to professional teachers that they do not cross physically the boundary, but just become aware of it, that we can cross and violate this boundary. And this is really important in developing, as I mentioned before, this confident and competitive player. We always have to be aware of this boundary and giving also feedback. So this is important to learn self-confidence, to learn and accept responsibility. And I'm sure a lot of people know that it's so important to teach young adults and young players to be responsible about their behavior and what they do. To train inner awareness, this gets all in the frame of teaching. When you teach your students swings, to be self-connected, to train your subconscious, to have these answers inside. They have to learn who they are. And about the controllables. When you teach your students about what can I control in the course and what is outside of my control, it's also important when you give feedback that IU sorting always needs to be in place, so they really learn what is in my hand and what is in my coach's hand. And where is the line between this? I think that was my part.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I will continue from this. Thank you to everyone as well from my side for listening in today. Good feedback, as Shirin said before, is the key to improvement. Sartre, one of the existentialists in the 1980s, 70s, once said, hell are the others. And I think regarding feedback, this can be really true, because if feedback becomes judgment and becomes opinion giving unasked, then it can really be hell for us, especially in an environment where we're vulnerable and where we aspire to grow. So therefore, for us, very important is to differentiate what sort of feedback am I giving. And as Shirin said before, also to always be IU sorted, which is on top of everything. The feedback can be on behavior, the feedback can be on intention, and the feedback can be on frames. And it's very important for us. It's a difficult concept, and it's also something that really needs practice. But I can assure you, as a coach that ran through the system, it's valuable because you really can pace yourself. Where am I right now? Am I get dragged in by the student? Because sometimes the student moves around, the brain moves around, and he drags you along because you don't stand firm enough into what do I want to say to him right now. Is it feedback on behavior, and suddenly I'm just giving feedback on frames, or suddenly I'm just giving my opinion? and losing myself. So it's really keys that help me, as Shirin said, to be flexible, but also to stay strong, and also to help the student through the process in a strong way. One concept that I mentioned already on Monday that plays into this is the concept of submodalities. As said before, this is a concept that goes way back to Greek philosophy. Aristotle was the first one to mention that in a way that he called it the qualities of the senses. And it's under example of modalities. So visual, auditive, and kinesthetic are all modalities. And these submodalities are under examples. For us as coaches, they help us to really describe human behavior in a way where it's not an interpretation and where it's not linked to a concept. We often talk in concepts because it's quite handy when we talk on an everyday basis. So this means, for example, he's nervous, he's angry, he's sad. But what do these concepts consist of? And linked with this is the question, do they mean the same thing for everyone? So if I talk about nervous, if I talk about angry, is this the same for Shirin? Is this the same for Tom? That it really is neutral and can be neutrally looked at and said also without judgment, without opinion, without anything. It's basically like saying he was on plane. So I really suggest to you to go through a golf swing and look on concepts we use on a daily basis, like being on plane, sequence correctly, and try to really find out how you could describe this in submodalities in a really neutral, simple way. It's like I said, a process. We have to practice this many times to really get it into our system, but it's one way of being really clear, and especially when it comes to behavior, to not run into interpreting something, but into describing something. So the usual I experience on the course is people saying, John, I felt you were not motivated on the course today, and that frustrates me because we put so much work in. Instead of maybe going, John, on the back nine I saw, suddenly your head went down, your shoulders got round, you started walking very slow, and on 13, after a pat, I heard you hiss at yourself in a very loud and sharp tone. And I suggest maybe next time, try to keep your posture up and see what happens. If this changes the outcome or if this changes your state of mind, I suggest you to try this. So feedback on behavior is really describing what do I see and what do I hear. And especially what do I feel, only if it really either is something that I've been touched with or something I feel when I watch or hear that. But it's not interpreting like I feel you were nervous, or I feel you were angry, or I feel you were sad. And it's about stating what I liked about the situation and then suggesting different alternatives, which is also a very polite way to talk with people, and also in relationships get really great dynamics going, because you can talk about things that you normally would have maybe kept in and be afraid to say, because it's a very neutral, very respectful, very open way to just say, this is what I heard, this is what I saw, and this is what it made me feel, and I suggest maybe let's try this. The second way we can give feedback on is on intentions. It's very strongly linked to asking open questions, which means that we want to discover the why of the student. And one question could be, did the execution match your intention and or your ability? So from a coaching perspective, when I give feedback on intentions, it can be interesting, because, for example, you set up a drill, like you set up a line on the ground, you put the ball on top, and you try to make contact with the ground as close to the line as possible. And then you ask, okay, how was the last shot? And then the answer is, my left arm wasn't straight in the backswing, or I didn't do a full turn in the backswing. And then, for example, in this frame, you could feed back on that and say, okay, the exercise now was to focus on that line on the ground. How was your focus? Did it stay there? Did it drift? I would suggest for you to really try again, and on the next one, try to stay on that focus point. Or, for example, if you have a student that normally has between 5 to 20 swing thoughts when they go out, to really help them chunk maybe a few of them up into one big piece, one thought, and then give them feedback as soon as they lose that and drift back into old ways, old habits. And the same is true, for example, for expectations. If I have a player that struggles, is handicap 30, and thinks and gets angry and frustrated every time he misses a 3-meter putt, because his expectation would be to make all of them, then one part of feedback could be to show him, okay, what are realistic percentages? And for your handicap, what would be your challenge point? So where would you just leave your comfort zone and get enough challenge to make a step forward, but not too many steps forward so you feel frustrated in the process? The third part has to do with frames. I start with the bottom line, which says there is always a frame. So everything has a context. If we look at this webinar, for example, this is a frame. Every one of us that is here together now works in different golf clubs. They are frames for themselves, but we all work in one big frame, which is golf. So there is no such thing as, we call it, a framelessness. So there's always a context and always a frame. It's not always the same for each one of us, but if we look hard enough, we will always discover there is some context around it going on. This could be, for example, also a time frame, which could be the training hours from 2 till 4 every Sunday. This could be an activity frame, which is chipping, or now it's pitching, or now it's a bunker play. And this can also be style frames, which are linked also to culture, our own experiences, how we grew up, and maybe also our language. This is also style frames. When we give feedback on frames, for me, from a coaching perspective, it's very important to avoid generalizations. We tend to say, you always do this, and you always do that, and you always say this. For me, it's important to, when you give feedback, to also mention the frame you're talking about. For example, on the back 9, I saw you with your rounded back. This is the back 9. The front 9 was different, so he didn't do it all round, he did it on the back 9. And the same is after the putt on 13, I heard you hiss at yourself, which is the putt at 13. It's not always. And I think as coaches, it's very important, because the player needs to link his behavior and also the things that happen, like Shirin said, when something doesn't work, he needs to link it to a situation and to his strategy he's using. So it's very important to make him aware. In this situation, you did it very well. For example, I watched you on the course, and I saw the sequence of your pre-shot routine in putting was always the same. It was the same that I normally witness when I watch you play. Interesting, on the driving today, you changed your routine, the sequence changed. So whereas normally you do the practice swing at the beginning, before you go behind the ball and aim, you did the practice swing right at the end. And from this, describing the changes that have been witnessed. You can guide the student back to understand, okay, and to work out the strategy. So maybe my strategy changed today. Maybe something was going on, something distracted me, my strategy changed, and therefore the shots, the shots went all over the place off the tee. And my putting was really good that day because the strategy and the sequence of my pre-shot routine stayed the same. The same is also for me true as a coach when you check the frames you're in. For example, when you have a technical work with a student and they suddenly give you feedback or voice their opinion on the outcome of the shot, to really guide them back and say, okay, look, this is the technical frame, this is the changes. The ball flight right now is out there. We hit the ball, so we make the body react quicker to the changes. But the outcome for in this frame is not important. It's about the outcome of the technical changes. The same is true for performance training. If you have someone training on performance or playing in a tournament and suddenly coming up with some swing thoughts, one or many swing thoughts, to really give feedback and say, okay, back to the thing, you're in the performance mode right now, really try to avoid this, or maybe you can incorporate it into a focus thing like the target or the ground contact or the face contact. That makes it easier for the student to handle that situation. And it's also, for example, when you deal with players that on an elite level, when they go and play tournaments that are above their level. So they say, okay, I'm going to play a lot of tournaments this year where I have a good chance to win. And I want to play a few tournaments this year where I gain experience. It's not, it's a strong field, it's high competitive, it's different courses, difficult situations. I'm not used to this, I want to gain experience. Then it's also the frame check, and during the competition afterwards, the feedback to go, okay, this was the frame you were setting, this was your experience frame. Did you stay in there? Did you move outside? Did you suddenly want to win or make the cut, or did that shift? So I think feedback can be very valuable for us as coaches when we use it correctly. And to put this together, it's about the frames we're setting, and that means feedback is a lot about pacing and filtering our own words, our own style, our own delivery as well. So it's a tricky one because it's not just feeding back something to the other person, but we have to be very clear and have to practice this a lot, and to refine our the way we communicate it a lot. So it's hard work basically, but it really pays off. So we have to be aware of the frame that is set. And when it's framed as feedback, then it has to be really feedback, not opinion, not judgment, really feedback. And it has to be for the other person, for their growth, for their development. And we need to train to use these submodalities to describe behavior. The better we are with this, it's a beautiful tool where you can really simply describe things also to different level of players, especially when you deal with kids. It's amazing what you can do, because out of this you can create metaphors. So it's a beautiful way to really break it down to a simple level. This would be my take on feedback, and we would love to answer some of your questions now. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Maria and Shirin. Hope everybody enjoyed that. As I said at the beginning, we'll move straight on to the Q&A session. So if you have any questions for both of them, please post them in the chat now, and we'll spend a little bit of time going through those. I've just got one from Clara, who came in a little bit earlier. It's sort of actually not necessarily just feedback, more actually just generally sort of from a communications point of view, this one. Maria and Shirin, she's asking about using the term we, so using we rather than you to help a player feel more part of a team. Is that helpful or harmful?
Yeah, who
I guess for both of you, really. I guess both of you give your opinion.
Okay.
Yeah.
The word we is not wrong. It's again, it's just a question when you use we. Of course, there's we in a team, and then there is I and you. It's not always the same to put in a pot. And for some coaches and parents, it's a lot on the part we. So to tell Clara, my answers, of course, when you are with the team, there are points when you talk to the team where the word we is not wrong, is correct. It's just in the form of separating when you talk to a player, rather, to want to separate what he or she did and what your part is, then it becomes important.
I would also agree on this. Also, there is a tendency sometimes to use the we when it's good and the I or the you when it's bad. So I think it's very important to pick the moment where a we is appropriate and where is an I or a you is appropriate. Shirin and me worked with the Austrian girls team, and it's a lot about bonding. It's a lot about the we, especially in a team championship. But there is still 5, or with the coaches 7 I's in there. So there is a moment for a we and there's a moment for an I. And I think as a coach, it's important to find out when is the right moment to use which. So both are important, but in the right situation.
So it's using your judgment to understand the situation that's in front of you to then use it. Okay, I hope that answered your question, Clara. Mike asks, you have, I think this is to do with sub-modalities. He's got rhythm in visual, auditory and kinesthetic. How does it work in visual rhythm?
You want to say that, Marie? Because maybe with the swing?
I'll let you go first. I need a second to think.
How rhythm works in visual?
Yes, how does it work in visual?
Well, when I do this, I can see rhythm in nature. I can see when a tree moves, rhythm. I can see rhythm when a dog runs or when a jogger passes by. So rhythm is all around us. We can not only hear it and feel it. We can hear rhythm when there's the bass and we get the music. It transfers to the body. And also it's something we can see. And as the golfer, Marie will add, in the swing, you have rhythm in the swing, tempo and rhythm.
So rhythm is, for example, visual. In a visual sense, is the backswing to the downswing, for example, the ratio. This would be visual, where you can see is it rhythmical, is it consistent, or is at one point is there a stop, or is one part going quicker than the other? So this, for example, would be rhythm in a visual sense in golf, which can be very valuable, for example, in putting. Where you see a lot of jerky movements, very slow back and then very quick accelerated through, to really get an idea on rhythm. And again, rhythm is created when we use these apps and that a lot through visual or auditive, because it gives you the sound. But there's a lot of apps out there that already, like a pendulum, show you like a metronome, show you the movement as well in a visual sense.
I think just to add a very amateurish point on top of that from me is that I suppose a good example would be like somebody like Ernie Els in comparison to Victor Hovland, for example, who stops on 3 times on his backswing, whereas Ernie Els is really flowy. Like, is that a good example?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So one from Amir. Would it be different giving feedback to a higher handicap or a lower handicapper, or even a junior adult? So this is the differentiation of feedback to different types of individuals, basically.
Marie,
the element. Sorry, Shirin, go on.
No, it's a handicap golfer.
The elements stay the same. The depth might change. But for me, the elements and the respectful way in using the I, you, and staying within behavior, staying within intentions or frames would stay the same. It's just the depth you go, and probably when you talk to juniors, the wording you use. Maybe describe it more with metaphors or use really simple language. That would be my take on it.
Just a short to add. These are, as we said, key elements, and they're transferable to all areas, to basically all human beings in any context. So it's not only for golf. Marie added now specifically when you teach, maybe that you might be adding a few little things. The key elements always stay the same. It always helps also for the spouse when you give your spouse feedback, not to interpret, to really learn to describe behavior. It helps in conflicts. So you can really practice that all in your life. That is the beautiful thing about it. It's not a method that you only use for teaching in golf, where you now also have to differentiate between levels of golfers. It's basically something you can apply to anything.
So ultimately, the real skill is actually, the principles stay the same, but the skill is being able to apply it into different contexts, basically, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Question from me, really, actually, as well. Just wondering what your thoughts were on frequency of feedback. So just take your standard 30-minute to an hour golf lesson, for example. Is frequency of feedback important in that? So how much you deliver it?
Marie?
How do you mean? Can you clarify the question for me?
So I suppose, say for example, you just using that context of you're in a lesson at the minute for an hour or something, and you're teaching a student. Do you give a sort of feedback every single shot that they hit, or is there just one per shot, or three per? Sort of the relevance of how many times you're delivering feedback to a pupil. Does it impact learning or behavior ultimately?
I think a lot of what we do in a coaching environment during a lesson is feedback giving, because at the beginning you analyze something, you set a direction you want to go, and then when the student is hitting balls, you're basically his mirror. So what he can't see and hear, especially see, you help him to feed it back to him. For example, when you work on something technical on the movement, you always, after every shot normally, or a few shots, you give feedback. Yeah, that was the arm was in that position, now the club was too far front, too far back, too high, too low. So I think that's all part of the feeding back during the whole lesson, basically on the goal you set out at the beginning that you want to change.
Okay. And then one final one from me, really. What's the difference between a good coach and a really good coach in the way they feed back, sort of from your own experiences?
Should I start?
Yeah, I guess from both of you, yeah.
It's always, it's like, who goes first? So the question, so I rephrase or ask it if I got it right, to understand the difference of the coaching level, if someone is really good, just for feedback or in general?
I think in general, really, but I suppose, yeah, look at it from just a general communications point of view.
Yeah, that's an exciting question, because what makes a coach really good? And I think you all work with communication. You cannot not communicate. Everything you do is communication. And really to learn, as we said, to be aware of the words you're using, to be clear on your structure also when you talk to someone, to have, there's a lot of my experience, a lot of coaches talk just a lot. And a lot of these words are just like a big mixed salad. and a big ball, and sometimes this ball of words is just too much for a student also to take in. They hear then a lot of unsorted feedback or unsortedness with IU, and then it all gets mixed. And so the clearness of structure, the way I communicate to a student, is in my eyes something that is so important. And I wish that coaches in golf and other sports also get to their education way more skills and competence in communication, because it's the transfer and the wire of what you have in mind to get it to the student. And we all know it always comes to misunderstandings. Even people who might be sorted, we always have situations where we have to clear up our positions and our ideas and our understandings. And the better we are in using our words to have it in that way delivered to our students, the better I think it is as a coaching quality level.
For me, one big key would be the best coaches for me are the ones that make the player independent, that are not afraid to give the player, teach the player all the keys so they can start helping themselves, understanding themselves. I think that's one of the biggest ones for me, and I think that's the ones also that speak the most languages, the coaches. When you look, for example, I admire Butch because of the diversity of players he has. It's not one style, it's totally different personalities, swings, but there is something where he really finds each of their language to become independent and to become competent in helping themselves.
Yeah, I just thought that was a really good analogy as well that you mentioned, Shirin, where it's communication is sort of the wire between the coach and the student. I thought that was really that was quite a powerful message as well for people to take away. Okay, cool. Well, we'll close things off. But if anybody does have any other questions for Marie and Shirin today, just email me at tb@cpg.golf. In fact, I'll put that in now. And I'll forward those on to everybody if they do have any more questions. Just before everybody leaves as well, just want to close things off and say this is the final session of the CPG Masterclass series for now. We are going to review it and look to maybe bring some webinars later down the line, but I think it's come to a point where golf's starting to pick up, everybody's returning to work, and which is obviously a massive positive for everybody, and is ultimately what we want. So we're glad that everybody's been engaging with these webinars, they've enjoyed them, and we hope to see you again in the future with them as well. So thank you to Marie and Shirin as well for being contributors to the series, and to everybody else who's contributed to the series as well. Girls, I don't know if you have anything else you want to say to everybody to close things off as well.
Have a great golf season.
Sorry.
No, have a great golf season without Corona, and enjoy this beautiful sport in your profession. Thanks for joining in.
Thanks for everyone for listening, and thanks Ian, thanks Tom, and thanks Aston. That was legendary what you pulled off there. Very great work. Thank you very much. Yeah, so thank you everybody. As always, we will upload this webinar at the end to the hub page as well, so if you missed any of it, you can go on there. Other than that, I hope you have a safe season and a great evening. Thank you very much, and goodbye.